Every summer, my sister Greta and I visited our grandparents in Minnesota. Despite their age and health issues, they were wonderful people. Grandma Pat would prepare amazing meals, and Grandpa Nick would proudly show us his garden. They often surprised us with little practical jokes, like water buckets balanced on doors or fake body parts buried in our guest beds. Despite their health, they were young at heart. Last year, we didn't visit because they were still settling into their new home in a retirement community in Florida. This summer, however, Greta and I decided to fly down and spend a week with them. When they picked us up at the airport, they looked remarkably healthier and happier. It was incredible how much they had changed since we last saw them. As we drove to their place, Grandpa Nick asked us some odd questions about our lifestyle habits, like our diet, exercise routines, and whether we smoked. Greta happily disclosed that I was a smoker, and she wasn't. It seemed like they were genuinely interested in living healthier lives now. Arriving at their gated community, I was astonished by its size and beauty. All the houses were spacious, and every street offered a view of the ocean. The neighbors, all elderly like our grandparents, appeared healthy and active. They warmly greeted us, and some even invited us over for dinner. Feeling optimistic about this community, I hoped our parents would also live long and happy lives here. However, that night, my sleep was interrupted when Greta rushed into my room, visibly frightened. She claimed that Grandma Pat had stood at the foot of her bed, silently staring at her while she slept. Though unsettling, I reassured her that older people sometimes act strangely, especially after sundown. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of unease. Greta was nowhere to be found. And when I asked our grandparents, Grandma Pat claimed she had left early. However, I knew she wouldn't leave without telling me. Suspicious, I checked her room and noticed her belongings were gone, with the window wide open. Something she'd never do. Determined to find her, I followed fresh marks in the ground to the community center. Inside, I discovered a horrifying scene. A makeshift hospital room with Greta tied to a table, barely conscious and bleeding. She whispered that she thought they took her kidney. As I attempted to untie her, Grandma Pat appeared, applauding my discovery. To my horror, she revealed it was all a prank, including Greta's supposed injury. My grandparents were in on it, and the entire community was part of the elaborate joke. Feeling both relieved and disturbed, I realized the true extent of their twisted sense of humor. It was a chilling realization that their harmless jokes had crossed a dangerous line. As the neighbors joined in on the prank, laughing and smiling, I confronted them, questioning their involvement. Grandma Pat continued to reassure me that it was all just an elaborate joke, while Grandpa Nick wheeled Greta's table away to clean her up. Feeling deceived, I admitted that the cut on Greta looked convincing. Grandma Pat hugged me, reveling in her successful prank. Together, we left the room, surrounded by the smiling neighbors. Grandpa explained that Greta would return soon, as he washed off the fake blood. Back at their house, the neighbors congratulated my grandparents before dispersing to their own homes. Sitting at the kitchen table with my grandparents, Grandma offered me tea. However, as I noticed them both staring at me intently, I felt a sense of dread. Something wasn't right. I sensed danger. Refusing to drink the tea, I pretended to need the bathroom. Alone, I called the police, explaining the situation. Initially met with skepticism, the policewoman scolded me for what she believed was a prank call. As Grandma pounded on the bathroom door, demanding entry, I agreed to come out. Maintaining a facade of normalcy, I casually walked past my grandma and then broke into a run as soon as I was outside. Spotting a running golf cart, I commandeered it, fleeing the scene as a resident chased after me. Arriving at the police station, I recounted the events, pleading for help. In person, the police took my statement seriously, but upon returning to the retirement community, all evidence of the operating room had vanished. Neighbors, and even my grandparents denied any knowledge of the incident, gaslighting me into doubting my own reality. Feeling helpless and desperate for someone to believe me, I found myself trapped in a nightmare where the truth was obscured by deceit. The crimson velvet roses seemed to mock my anguish, their scent suffocating me as memories of past Valentine's days flooded my mind. 3 years ago, Liam had professed his love under the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower. But a year later, he vanished with only a text as a goodbye. As I gazed at the roses, a hollow laugh escaped my lips. Hope flickered within me. Perhaps this year would be different. Yet, when a stranger appeared at my door with a single crimson rose, dread crept over me. His unsettling presence sent a shiver down my spine. But loneliness urged me forward to accept the gift. The rose, however, held a sinister secret. Its stem oozed black liquid. And as I reached for it, the man's chilling words echoed in my mind. Before I could comprehend, the rose mutated before my eyes, its fleshy fingers latching onto my hand in agony. With horror, I watched as the grotesque creature burrowed beneath my skin, sending waves of excruciating pain through me. Desperate for relief, I searched for something to sever the connection, my cries echoing in the empty room. Finally, I found a vial of clear liquid hidden away, a memento from my grandmother, an herbalist. With trembling hands, I poured the liquid onto the writhing creature, watching as it dissolved in agony, releasing me from its grip. As the nightmare ended, I realized the danger lurking within the roses and the sinister intentions of the stranger who had delivered it. Terrified but determined, I knew I had to uncover the truth behind this horrifying ordeal before it consumed me entirely. The disintegrated remains of the rose left behind a haunting reminder of the terror I had endured. Collapsing onto the floor, I cradled my throbbing hand, the memory of the creature's fleshy fingers still imprinted on my skin. Outside, the city buzzed with celebrations, a cruel contrast to the horrors within my sanctuary. Sleep eluded me, plagued by restless nightmares filled with writhing roses and ominous storm cloud eyes. Morning dawned, drawing me back to the coffee table where the dust of the destroyed rose lay undisturbed, now adorned with intricate symbols of dark magic. A chilling realization washed over me. I had been ensnared in a twisted game of vengeance orchestrated by Liam. Scouring through Liam's online profiles, I searched for any clue to his whereabouts, fueled by coffee and paranoia. Finally, a grainy photo led me to an abandoned church, shrouded in mist and silence. Inside, the air was thick with incense and decay. A single red rose wilted on the altar, its stem oozing black ichor. Following a trail of the sinister substance, I reached the crypt where Liam awaited, consumed by madness. Bound within a pentagram was Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, and the target of his twisted game. With resolve, I confronted Liam, determined to end his reign of terror. Flung the vial of willow tears at the pentagram, the liquid sunlight shattering the dark magic and freeing Sarah from his grasp. Despite his twisted satisfaction, I refused to be another pawn in his game. With courage, I faced him, ready to put an end to his sinister machinations. Sarah gasped as the emerald light dissolved the dark magic, freeing her from the thorny vines. Liam recoiled in terror as the madness drained from his eyes, leaving only stark fear in its wake. Fueled by rage, I demanded answers from him, but his pathetic justifications fell flat, revealing a mind corrupted by darkness. As I raised the fallen candelabra, ready to deliver justice, Sarah's voice pierced the silence, pleading for mercy. Her words resonated with me, reminding me of the darkness I fought against. Realizing that revenge wouldn't heal the wounds Liam had inflicted, I lowered the candelabra, choosing to walk away from the cycle of violence, leaving Liam and Sarah to confront their shared past. I followed the path illuminated by the emerald light of the willow tears, symbolizing my journey towards forgiveness and redemption. Reflecting on the past, memories of my dad's parents surfaced, though I barely remembered them. Their religious fervor and the somber atmosphere of their house lingered in my mind. Their recent revelation of being my biological grandparents added a layer of complexity to my family history. Following my dad's sudden death, the funeral became a solemn affair, marked by the presence of his work friends and the unexpected appearance of my biological grandparents. Their silent presence raised questions about my dad's origins, prompting me to seek answers. After the funeral, I confronted my mom about my dad's adoption, only to receive confirmation without further explanation. The encounter with my biological grandparents left me with a mix of emotions, from shock and curiosity to a desire for connection. Receiving Grandpa Jack's phone number, I contemplated reaching out to him, unsure of where this newfound knowledge would lead me. As Jared and I grappled with the revelation, we were left to navigate the complexities of our family history and the unanswered questions surrounding our dad's past. Feel heavy. My thoughts were sluggish, and I struggled to focus. Panicked, I tried to respond, but my words slurred together incoherently. Jared's concern grew as he reached out to touch my arm, but his hand froze midair as he too began to experience the same strange sensations. Grandpa Jack and Nana exchanged a knowing glance, their expressions shifting from warmth to cold calculation. It dawned on me that something was terribly wrong. I tried to stand up, to demand answers, but my limbs refused to obey, as if weighed down by invisible chains. Fear gripped me as I realized we were trapped, at the mercy of these strangers who held the key to our family's secrets. Despite our attempts to resist, the seductive pull of unconsciousness grew stronger, enveloping us in darkness. In the haze of fading consciousness, I vowed to fight against whatever sinister forces sought to control us, to unravel the truth behind our family's tangled history, and to protect Jared and myself from whatever nefarious plans lay ahead. Struggled to keep my eyes open, the overwhelming drowsiness pulling me into unconsciousness. My thoughts were muddled, and I could barely speak, let alone comprehend what was happening. Jared's voice pierced through the haze, demanding answers from Nana, but her response only added to the confusion. As Jared guided me away from the table, I felt my strength waning, and soon I collapsed to the ground. Helpless, I watched as Jared was subdued by our grandparents' servants, his struggles futile against their overwhelming force. Grandpa Jack's words echoed in my mind, revealing the sinister truth behind their actions. My vision faded as I succumbed to unconsciousness, unaware of the horrors that awaited us. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself in the car with Jared, his pale and bruised form beside me. His revelation about the missing kidney sent a chill down my spine, confirming our worst fears. Rushing Jared to the hospital, we recounted the harrowing ordeal to the doctor, who was incredulous at our story. Despite our efforts to seek justice, the police refused to investigate, citing our grandparents' influence in the town. Left to grapple with the trauma of our experience, we focused on caring for our mom and rebuilding our lives. Though our family ties had been shattered, we found solace in each other's presence, determined to move forward despite the lingering shadows of the past. As I sat in the desolate cafe, the rain outside mirrored the dreariness in my heart. Alone with my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that engulfed me, longing for the return of normalcy and the companionship of my friend, Josh. Chilling calmness in his voice that sent a shiver down my spine. Time seemed to slow as I processed his words, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Instinct kicked in, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing with fear. The girl's presence added to the surrealness of the moment, her silence only amplifying the tension in the air. I glanced around frantically, searching for any means of escape. But the realization of being trapped within the confines of the restaurant settled heavily upon me. Panic threatened to consume me as I struggled to formulate a plan. The man's gaze bore into mine, his intentions clear as he advanced toward me with the menacing blade. I braced myself for the inevitable, my mind racing with thoughts of loved ones left behind and the life I had yet to live. But just as he closed the distance between us, a sudden commotion erupted outside. I heard shouts and the sound of approaching footsteps, followed by the blaring of sirens in the distance. The man hesitated, his focus momentarily diverted by the chaos outside. Seizing the opportunity, I lunged for the nearest exit, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I sprinted into the rain-soaked night. Behind me, I could hear the girl's voice, pleading and desperate. My heart ached with the weight of her fear, but survival instinct drove me forward, propelling me into the unknown. As I fled into the darkness, the events of that fateful encounter replayed in my mind, haunting me with the realization that danger lurked in the most unexpected places. But amidst the terror, a flicker of hope remained, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there was still light to be found. Scream, but I knew that any noise would only provoke him further. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest cooking utensils, my mind racing with thoughts of survival. As I moved behind the counter, I tried to steady my breathing, desperate to conceal the terror coursing through my veins. The man's words echoed in my mind, each syllable dripping with malice and intent. With a shaky grip, I began to prepare food, my movements slow and deliberate as I tried to buy time. praying for a miracle or some form of intervention. But deep down, I knew that I was alone, facing a threat unlike anything I had ever encountered. The girl's presence loomed over me, a silent reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the confines of the restaurant. I could feel her fear, mirroring my own, as the man's menacing presence cast a shadow over us both. As I worked, the sound of rain tapping against the windows seemed to mock me, a cruel reminder of the helplessness of my situation. With each passing moment, the weight of impending doom pressed down upon me, threatening to crush me beneath its suffocating grip. But amidst the chaos and fear, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I refused to go down without a fight, determined to cling to whatever semblance of hope remained. With trembling hands, I continued to cook, my movements fueled by a desperate determination to survive. And as I served the food, I prayed that it would be enough to appease the man's twisted desires, buying me precious time to devise a plan of escape. Josh's sudden appearance was like a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of our predicament. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched him bravely confront our assailant. The sound of the Rubik's Cube striking the man's head echoed through the restaurant, followed by the sickening thud as he collapsed to the ground. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as we all processed what had just happened. But there was no time to dwell on the shock of the moment. With the arrival of the police, a sense of relief washed over me, accompanied by a rush of gratitude for Josh's timely intervention. As the officers secured the unconscious man, I found myself enveloped in a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, relief, and gratitude mingling together in a tumultuous mix. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized just how close we had come to a tragic fate. Josh's quick thinking and decisive action had undoubtedly saved our lives, and I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude towards him. He had risked his own safety to come to our aid, demonstrating a selflessness and bravery that I would never forget. As we waited for the authorities to take control of the situation, the redhead girl sought refuge with us, her tears a testament to the trauma we had all endured. In that moment, we were united by our shared experience, bound together by the harrowing ordeal we had just survived. With the immediate threat neutralized, I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that we were finally safe. But even as the adrenaline began to fade, I couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease that lingered in the air. As we recounted the events to the police, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for the strangers who had come to our rescue. In the face of danger, they had shown courage and compassion, reminding me that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope. As the authorities took control of the situation, I found myself overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Relief flooded through me, knowing that we were finally safe from the threat that had loomed over us just moments before. Yet, beneath that relief lingered a sense of disbelief at the events that had unfolded. With trembling hands, I reached out to comfort the redhead girl who had sought refuge with us. Her tears mirrored my own, reflecting the shared trauma we had all endured. In that moment, our bond transcended the chaos around us, offering solace in the face of adversity. As the police conducted their investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The realization that danger could lurk around any corner weighed heavily on my mind, casting a shadow over the once familiar surroundings of the cafe. Amidst the chaos, Josh remained a pillar of strength. His presence, a source of reassurance in the midst of uncertainty. His quick thinking had undoubtedly saved us from a fate too grim to contemplate, and for that, I was eternally grateful. As we waited for the authorities to wrap up their investigation, I found myself reflecting on the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. The events of that fateful day had shaken me to the core, reminding me of the unpredictability of the world we live in. But amidst the darkness, there was also light, the kindness of strangers, the courage of friends, and the resilience of the human spirit. In the aftermath of tragedy, we had come together, united in our shared humanity and a determination to overcome. As the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the cafe, I felt a glimmer of hope stir within me. Though the scars of that day would linger, I knew that we would emerge stronger, bound together by the bonds of friendship and the triumph of the human spirit. Together, we would navigate the uncertain road ahead, drawing strength from each other and the knowledge that no matter what challenges may come our way, we would face them together, united in our resolve to persevere. In the aftermath of the harrowing events at the cafe, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The wounds, both physical and emotional, began to heal, leaving behind scars as reminders of the resilience that had carried us through the darkest of times. As time passed, the memories of that day faded into the background, replaced by the ebb and flow of everyday life. Yet, the lessons learned remained etched in our hearts, serving as a beacon of strength in moments of doubt and uncertainty. Together, we emerged from the shadows, our bonds forged stronger by the trials we had faced. Though the road ahead may be fraught with challenges, we faced it with courage and determination, knowing that we were not alone. In the face of adversity, we found solace in each other's company, drawing strength from the unwavering support of friends and loved ones. And as we looked towards the horizon, we did so with hope in our hearts, knowing that no matter what the future may hold, we would face it together, united in our resilience and the enduring power of the human spirit. And so, we embarked on the next chapter of our lives, guided by the lessons learned and the bonds that bound us together, ready to embrace whatever challenges may come our way with unwavering resolve and a steadfast belief in the resilience of the human soul. For in the end, it is not the trials we face that define us, but how we rise above them, finding strength in adversity and forging ahead with courage, hope, and the knowledge that, together, we are truly unstoppable. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. If you're new here and enjoy horror stories, join us by clicking subscribe down below to stay up to date with future uploads. Please, can we get 500 likes before I get started? Let's begin. When I was 18 years old, I worked for a family pizzeria here in downtown New York. It was a job that I had taken on to earn some extra money on the side while I was studying. I did have enough energy to get a job, but being so young meant that I had a limited choice of which job I could actually have. My parents owned a company, but it was a construction company. So, as you can imagine, 1, I'm not old enough to be on the training side, and 2, they'd have to pay out tons just to ensure me to train me in the first place. I looked around, and after a while, settled with the delivery driver position. I passed my driving test around a year prior. I wasn't awful, and for most of the time, I'd been learning with my dad on the weekends. I hadn't had any crashes. Well, not until the point of writing this story, touch wood. I went over to this pizzeria and applied inside. When I got in there, it was kind of disheartening. There were only 3 people in there. It was a Wednesday night, though, so I cut them some slack and walked straight up to the bar. When I got to the bar, I spoke with the lady behind it, who was pouring out some drinks at the side. "Hey, I'm here to inquire about the delivery job. Do you need a driver right now?" I asked. "Yes, just wait 1 second," she said to me. She finished pouring the drinks and then ran around the back out of the bar and went into a room behind the pizzeria. I must have been stood there for 10 or so minutes, awkwardly looking at the people eating their pizza. Then, probably wondering, what's this guy doing standing in the same spot? Eventually, after waiting way more than I felt comfortable to do so, an elderly guy came out. He was a big guy, bald on top, and seemed to have a world of energy about him. This would be Angelo. Angelo was the owner of the pizzeria, and the pizzeria had been in his family for many years. Angelo shook my hand firmly. He guided me into the back room and sat me down at his desk. I hadn't planned to do an interview then and there, but it seems like I've been forced to. I didn't have any paperwork. I didn't have any of my grades or qualifications, and I damn near wasn't dressed well at all. As I sat down, Angelo slouched in his desk chair opposite me. "So, Ryan, what is it that I can do for you?" he said with an Italian accent. I'm here about the pizza delivery job," I said, confused as to what more to say to impress this guy. Was I supposed to tell him my strengths, my weaknesses, what I wanted to do, why I wanted to deliver pizza? Well, I didn't. That's how I answered. He looked a bit baffled at first, as if he wasn't expecting the answer I gave him. He turned to his computer, started typing away. I'm assuming he was putting in details about me. He asked for my phone number, my full name, and my availability to deliver pizzas. After this, he turned back to me once he finished typing, then handed me over some keys. Apparently, he wanted me to drive a vehicle that he had out the back with all the logos and signs on the top of it. He asked to see proof of my insurance, then contacted my insurer and insured me on the car that he has. After this, he handed me a cap, a t-shirt, and this really weird pair of tight-fitting black pants. Everything was going well until he handed me those pants. I'll be honest, I thought to myself. There's no way these things are actually fitting me. I took them and walked back out to my car, which was parked along the side of the sidewalk. I had parked in a short stay bay, so I was worried that I could have got a citation. My bank account was on zero. It may have even been in debt, overdrawn. But my parents would always help me out in situations like that. When I got back, thank God I didn't have any citations or tickets on my windshield. I threw the clothes and the cap that he gave me in the back of the car, and then drove off home to tell my parents that I'd secured the job. My mom was over the moon. My dad gave me an eventful pat on the back and said, Well done, boy. My first shift would start in 3 days' time, on the good old traditional Friday night. I was dreading it, as I knew it was going to be so busy. But what's the point in enlisting in a job like this if I want to always have it quiet? I was at the job for a couple of months. Nothing out of the blue happened. If anything, it was kind of boring. I'd get used to seeing the same familiar faces, single lonely guys in their mid-40s, ordering a pizza once a week, the same one every week, with the same side of wedges and the same side of soda. I didn't make friends with them. None of them tipped me. Barely anyone tipped me once I'd been there 2 months. I didn't think I'd receive more than 3 tips, which was kind of crazy for New York. Tell me about it. When I finally got down to the fact that I hated this job, things were going so well that I just talked myself into staying for at least 1 more month. I'd saved up a lot of money at this point. For 18 years old, I think $1,000 is a lot of money. Well, back then it was. Nowadays it's chump change because of inflation. I was doing a delivery. I got back to the pizzeria, and at this point, the furthest delivery away I had done was maybe around 5 to 6 miles. This delivery, Angelo came out to tell me, would be 8 miles away. It required me to drive all the way out of New York and head into the suburbs. I felt a little uneasy about this job, but I took it anyway, as I didn't want to piss the employer. Shut with duct tape. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and sluggish. A combination of fear and the injuries I sustained in the accident. Memories of the man who had abducted me flooded back. His sinister gaze, his overpowering strength. I didn't know his intentions, but they couldn't be good. My mind raced with possibilities. Torture, ransom, something even worse. I strained against my restraints, but they held fast. The others in the cellar were in a similar predicament. Their muffled cries of fear barely audible. I racked my brain for a plan, a way out of this nightmare, but nothing came. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional sound from above. Footsteps, perhaps, or the creak of a floorboard. Each noise sent a shiver down my spine, filling me with dread. As the night wore on, exhaustion took hold, and despite my fear, sleep claimed me once more. When I woke again, it was to the sound of voices above, muffled but distinct. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. The cellar door creaked open, and a shaft of dim light pierced the darkness. I held my breath, waiting for whatever horror awaited me. But instead of the man who had taken me, it was someone else. A woman, her face twisted with concern. She hurried over, cutting through my restraints with trembling hands. As she worked, she whispered assurances, promising that everything would be okay. Finally free, I stumbled to my feet, my body protesting every movement. The woman helped me up, leading me out of the cellar and into the cool night air. Outside, police cars lined the street, their lights flashing in the darkness. Officers bustled about, their voices low and urgent. I was safe, rescued from the clutches of my captor, but even as relief flooded through me, I couldn't shake the memory of those terrifying hours in the cellar, or the knowledge that others might still be out there, waiting for their own chance at escape. The ordeal was over, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger long after. And as I looked out at the world beyond, I knew that I would never take my freedom for granted again. Quickly, then continue to endure this torture. I held my breath, waiting for his next move, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I felt a shift in the air, a slight movement as the man approached. I tensed, ready to spring into action at the slightest opportunity. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity as I lay there, feigning death. Then it happened. Without warning, I felt a sharp impact against my legs as the man kicked me, testing my response. I didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle, just continued to lie there, lifeless. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the girl's cries echoing through the cellar. Then, I heard the man mutter a curse under his breath before turning away and ascending the stairs, the cellar door creaking shut behind him. Relief flooded through me as I realized my plan had worked, at least for now. But there was still a long road ahead. I knew I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not for a moment. Gathering my strength, I slowly pushed myself up, my muscles protesting with every movement. The other girls watched me, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "We need to find a way out of here," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of our collective breathing. "We can't let him keep us trapped like this." Together, we began to assess our surroundings, searching for any sign of weakness in our captor's fortress. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to escape, no matter the cost. And as we huddled together, as I preferred to save my appetite for the free pizza I could snag from the pizzeria. Plus, I usually grabbed a quick snack during my deliveries if I got hungry. On this particular evening, I was cruising through the streets, delivering pizzas left and right. It was a typical night, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I approached one of the addresses on my list, something caught my eye. The house was dark, unusually so for this time of night. Most people had their lights on, especially if they were expecting a delivery. But this house was like a black hole, swallowing up all the light around it. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just skip this delivery and move on to the next one. But then, I remembered the incident with the woman and her child, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With a sense of foreboding, I parked my scooter and approached the house. As I knocked on the door, I listened intently for any signs of life inside, but all I heard was silence. Taking a deep breath, I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed the door open cautiously, calling out, "Pizza delivery!" The darkness inside seemed to swallow my voice, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. But I couldn't turn back now. I stepped into the house, the smell of stale air and neglect hitting me like a physical force. I called out again, louder this time, but still there was no response. I reached for the light switch, flicking it on and illuminating the room with a harsh, fluorescent glow. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was empty, save for a few pieces of furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Confusion and fear gnawed at my insides as I made my way through the house, checking each room in turn. But there was no sign of anyone, no sign of life at all. Feeling a growing sense of unease, I hurried back outside and called the pizzeria. I explained the situation to my manager, who told me to leave the pizzas on the doorstep and come back to the store. As I drove away from that dark, empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened there. And even now, years later, I still wonder what became of the people who lived there, and if they're still out there somewhere, lost in the shadows, way to the first delivery I couldn't shake off the feeling of nausea and dizziness. Every bump in the road felt like a punch to my already aching body, and the smell of the pizzas in the car made me want to vomit. I pulled up to the address and forced myself to get out of the car. Grabbing the pizza box and mustering all the energy I had left to walk up to the door, I rang the doorbell and waited, trying to steady my breathing and ignore the pounding headache. When the door finally opened, I plastered on a fake smile and handed over the pizza, making small talk as best as I could. But the customer must have noticed that something was off, because they gave me a concerned look and asked if I was okay. I tried to brush it off, insisting that I was just feeling a bit under the weather. But as soon as I got back into my car, I knew that I wouldn't be able to make any more deliveries. I was feeling too weak and sick to continue. Reluctantly, I called my manager and explained the situation, apologizing profusely for having to cut my shift short. Thankfully, they were understanding and told me to go home and rest. As I drove back, I could feel my body getting heavier and heavier. And by the time I made it home, I could barely keep my eyes open. I stumbled inside, collapsed onto the couch, and fell into a fitful sleep. When I woke up several hours later, I was drenched in sweat and still feeling awful. I knew that I needed to see a doctor, so I made an appointment and went in the next day. The doctor diagnosed me with a severe sinus infection and prescribed some medication to help alleviate the symptoms. It took a few days, but eventually I started to feel better and was able to return to work. Looking back on that day, I realized that I should have listened to my body and called in sick instead of trying to push through. It was a valuable lesson in self-care and knowing when to prioritize my health over work. Thank you for sharing your story. It sounds like you went through a harrowing experience, and I'm glad to hear that you ultimately recovered from the coma and are doing okay now. Your experience serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of listening to our bodies and taking care of our health, even when we feel pressure to push through. It's commendable that you're sharing your story to raise awareness about the dangers of driving while sick and the importance of self-care. Hopefully, your experience will encourage others to prioritize their health and safety, especially when it comes to operating a vehicle. Take care of yourself, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Your resilience and determination to overcome challenges are truly inspiring. In conclusion, the story shared here serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of prioritizing our health and well-being. Whether it's heeding the warning signs of illness or recognizing when we need to take a break, listening to our bodies can make all the difference. Let's take this opportunity to reflect on the significance of self-care and the impact it can have on our lives and the lives of those around us. Remember, it's okay to ask for help, to take a step back when needed, and to prioritize our health above all else. Thank you for sharing your story, and let's continue to support and uplift each other on our journeys toward better health and happiness. Take care, and may you find strength and resilience in every step of your journey. Making the decision to become a social worker was probably the best decision I've ever made. It's been rewarding, enlightening, and I even met my partner through social work. I really can't imagine doing anything else at this stage, but I'll be honest. There have been 1 or 2 times when I've asked myself if I'm really in the right line of work. Social workers deal with some pretty heavy stuff sometimes on a day-to-day basis. Without a doubt, the worst case I've ever dealt with involved a guy that we'll call Tim. Tim, which obviously isn't his real name, reminded me of a young Tim Robbins from around his Shawshank era. He was quiet and well-spoken, but he had been dealing with paranoid schizophrenia since his early 20s. He'd been in and out of institutions, but had apparently made a lot of progress after happening across the right combination of medications. So, instead of regularly checking in with doctors and being unable to work, Tim found himself a job as a part-time library clerk to supplement the money he already got from the state. I was assigned as his social worker to keep tabs on him. One day, I make a stop at Tim's place for a quick face-to-face that we had planned. But he's not home. I give him a call on his cell, and when he doesn't answer, I assume that he's picked up an extra shift at the library or something. Tim had already told me that he couldn't answer his phone while he was on shift. And while I thought this might have been a little overzealous, I could understand him wanting to protect the sanctity of the library's silence or something. But missing a meeting like that was extremely frowned upon, and I wasn't looking forward to warning him about it, which might put pressure on what was generally a healthy working relationship. I gave Tim a few more calls later on that day, but still, he's not picking up. And the longer my calls and texts went unanswered, the more I started to worry. I went to bed pretty much resigned to the fact that I'd have to tell my superiors about the missed meeting, and that Tim appeared to be ducking me. But then, bright and early the next morning, and by that, I mean just after 6 o'clock in the morning, Tim returned my call. However, he sounded very different. Like I said earlier, Tim was a pretty quiet kind of dude. Sometimes he'd only ever return single-word replies after a moment or two in deep thought. But when he called me that morning, he sounded frantic. He apologized for having missed my calls and explained that he'd been busy. When I asked if it was a work thing or some kind of family emergency, he said no. Instead, Tim explained that he had what he called a breakthrough, and that he'd like me to stop by his apartment as soon as possible so we could discuss it. I told him the earliest I could be there was maybe 7:30 to 8, and thanked him for getting back to me. But I also told him that he'd only narrowly missed being written up for a missed appointment, and that if it happened again, I'd have no choice but to inform my superiors. He said that was fine, and all that mattered was that I come over to his apartment so he could make up for the missed appointment. So I got out of bed and started with my morning routine about an hour earlier than I normally would. By the time I got into my car and started driving into the city, I wasn't exactly in the best of moods. I grabbed some coffee, then drove over to Tim's apartment. When I arrived just after 7:40-ish, he buzzed me up. I took the elevator up and then knocked on Tim's door, but he didn't let me in right away. He called out frantically asking who was there. He sounded afraid of who might be. When I told him, I got the impression that he took a long, hard look at me through the peephole of his apartment door. His breathing sounded shaky when he asked me to do him a favor. When he opened the door, I had to promise not to freak out. That request woke me up faster than any amount of coffee could. I told him that I'd try not to freak out, but that depended entirely on what I was about to be faced with. There was this moment of hesitation, and then Tim opened the door. The upper half of his head was covered almost completely in bandages, and there was a huge blotch of dried blood on the clump of rags covering one eye. At first, I thought I'd solved the mystery of why Tim had missed his meeting the day before. All I wanted to know was what happened, if he was okay, and if he wanted me to drive him to the hospital or something. I can tell the difference between a professionally applied medical dressing and some Franken bandage that had been clobbered together from the contents of an old first aid kit. And what was wrapped around Tim's head was definitely the latter. My first priority was to get Tim proper medical attention, because whatever injury he'd just taken, it most definitely hadn't been treated properly. But Tim insisted on showing me something first. He also mentioned that he had a favor to ask of me, which I assumed was to drive him to a hospital, but as it turned out, that's not quite what he wanted from me. In his frantic state, with half his head bandaged, and what appeared to be a near-life-threatening injury, Tim refused to go to the hospital until I'd heard what he had to say. I agreed to listen to him for 1 minute, and then we were going to the hospital. Tim said he didn't need a minute, and ran off to what I'm pretty sure was his bathroom. Then comes back with what looked to be a small glass ashtray that was smeared with blood. I remember feeling my heart start to race as I realized that something was really, really wrong. Tim hadn't had an accident or been attacked. He looked very proud of what he was about to reveal. Handle their issues through the courts. Andy had worked tirelessly to ensure the child's safety and well-being, often staying late at the office to go over the details of the case and coordinate with various agencies involved in the child's care. But despite all of Andy's efforts, the child's situation seemed to worsen over time. The foster parents reported behavioral issues that were becoming increasingly difficult to manage, and there were concerns about the child's emotional development in the unstable environment. Andy fought tooth and nail to advocate for the child, attending court hearings and meetings with social services to push for a better placement and more support. Eventually, after months of struggle, Andy managed to secure a place for the child in a specialized residential care facility equipped to handle his complex needs. It was a bittersweet victory, as Andy knew that the child would likely never be able to return to a traditional family setting, but at least in the care facility, he would have access to the resources and support he needed to thrive as much as possible given his circumstances. As Andy finished recounting the story, I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy for both him and the child. It was a stark reminder of the harsh realities of the work we do as social workers, and the sometimes heartbreaking outcomes we must navigate in pursuit of the best interests of our clients. After that night at the pub, I found myself reflecting on Andy's story often. It served as a sobering reminder of the importance of perseverance and dedication in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. And while I knew that my own journey as a social worker would undoubtedly be filled with its own trials and tribulations, I also felt a renewed sense of determination to do whatever it takes to make a positive impact in the lives of those I serve. Story. I suppose I'll do my best to carry on his legacy in sharing the lessons he imparted to us. The importance of confronting trauma, seeking support, and learning from the experiences of others cannot be overstated, especially in a field as emotionally taxing as social work. Andy's story serves as a stark reminder of the harsh realities we face in our profession. It's not always easy, and And sometimes the outcomes are heartbreaking. But through it all, we must continue to advocate for those in need, to fight for justice and safety, and to never give up hope. As I reflect on Andy's words, I'm reminded of the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the challenges we face, there is always hope for healing and growth. And by coming together as a community, sharing our stories, and supporting one another, we can find strength in solidarity. So, to all my fellow social workers out there, I encourage you to keep fighting the good fight, to never lose sight of why you chose this path, and to always remember that you are not alone. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. Became physically aggressive towards us, leaving me with just one deputy to handle the situation. As the chaos unfolded around us, I knew we had to act quickly to ensure the safety of the child. The mother's hysterics were escalating, and I could see the fear in the child's eyes as he clung to her, unsure of what was happening. With the remaining deputy by my side, we tried to reason with the mother, explaining that we were there to help and that the child needed to be removed from the unsafe environment. But she was beyond reasoning, her mind clouded by the grip of addiction and paranoia. As the tension mounted, I made the decision to physically intervene, gently prying the child from his mother's grasp while the deputy restrained her boyfriend. It was a tense and emotional moment, but ultimately, we were able to safely remove the child from the home and transport him to a temporary shelter where he could receive the care and support he so desperately needed. In the aftermath of the incident, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The encounter had been volatile and dangerous, and it served as a stark reminder of the risks we face in our line of work. But despite the challenges, I knew that we had done the right thing by intervening and removing the child from harm's way. As I reflect on that day, I'm reminded of the importance of perseverance and dedication in the face of adversity. Our job as social workers is not easy, but it is incredibly rewarding, knowing that we have the power to make a difference in the lives of those we serve. And so, I continue to carry out my duties with determination and compassion, knowing that each day brings new challenges and new opportunities to create positive change in the world. The scene was chaotic as I struggled to pry the child from his mother's arms. My fellow deputy and I were left alone by the others, who had rushed upstairs, perhaps to retrieve something they shouldn't have. The child's mother screamed and cried, resisting our attempts. When I finally managed to get a hold of her, she started spitting and scratching, hurling racial slurs at me. The deputy had to restrain her while I peeled the child away from her. He was so malnourished that he hardly put up any physical resistance. It was evident that the woman had warrants for child neglect and endangerment. My colleague cuffed her and led her to a cruiser outside. Meanwhile, I held on to the child in a room with large windows facing the street. As I watched his mother being put into the back of the vehicle, the child suddenly burst with energy. He sank his teeth into my biceps, causing me to yell out in pain. Instinctively, I pulled away, giving him the opportunity to slip from my grasp. What happened next is etched into my memory like a recurring nightmare. The child, in a panic, grabbed a side table and hurled it at the window, shattering the glass into large shards. In a slow-motion blur, he attempted to jump through the broken pane, miscalculated, slamming headfirst into the sharp edge. The sight of him scalping himself will haunt me forever. Despite the horror, I managed to return to work after a brief hiatus. I questioned whether I could continue in this line of work, but two things kept me going. Firstly, the support of my colleagues. Abandoning them felt like betrayal. Secondly, the belief that as a social worker, I fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As for the child, he survived the ordeal with scars as reminders of his harrowing experience. Now, let's transition to the story of Victoria, a young girl born in the Ivory Coast, whose life took a dramatic turn when her great-aunt, Marie Theresa Kua, took her to France for a better life. As Victoria's great-aunt, Marie Theresa Kua worked long hours at Northwick Park Hospital. She entrusted Victoria's care to a local childminder named Priscilla Cameron. Initially, there were no red flags regarding Marie's treatment of Victoria. However, Priscilla began to notice concerning behaviors. For instance, she discovered a deep cut on Victoria's finger and was told by Marie that Victoria had been playing with a razor blade. Priscilla expressed her concerns to Marie, who assured her it wouldn't happen again. Another observer of Marie's negligent behavior was Esther A.A., a distant relative and midwife with strong religious convictions. When Esther visited Marie on June 14th, 1999, she was alarmed to find fresh wounds on Victoria's face and observed dangerous hazards in the home, such as accessible kitchen chemicals and razor blades. Esther anonymously reported Marie's suspected child abuse to social services, initiating an investigation. However, due to a breakdown in communication within the social services system, Esther's report was initially overlooked, delaying the investigation by 3 weeks. By the time social workers visited Marie's former residence on Nickel Road, she and Victoria had already moved to Somerset Gardens in Tottenham, following Marie's newfound relationship with Carl Manning, a bus driver. Local social services finally began an investigation upon learning of Marie's relocation. But by then, Marie and Victoria had evaded detection. The vast population of London and the delayed response from social services posed significant challenges in locating them. Despite efforts to track them down, Marie and Victoria seemed to have disappeared within the bustling city. The narrative continues to underscore the systemic challenges and oversights in child protection services, highlighting the tragic consequences of bureaucratic inefficiencies and communication failures. Let's continue with the unfolding events in Victoria's life and the efforts to locate her amidst the complexities of London's urban landscape. Emergency workers faced an immense challenge in locating Marie and Victoria amidst London's vast urban landscape. Concurrently, Marie, aware of the impending investigation, sought temporary care for Victoria. She approached Priscilla Cameron, asking her to look after Victoria while she was at work. Priscilla, cognizant of Marie's relationship with Carl Manning, questioned why he couldn't care for Victoria. Marie evaded the question, instead proposing that Priscilla take care of Victoria permanently. Priscilla, though willing to help temporarily, emphasized the need for Marie to involve the authorities if she couldn't care for her child. Later that day, when Marie dropped off Victoria at Priscilla's home, both Priscilla and her daughter, Avel Cameron, were alarmed by Victoria's injuries. Dr. Reeb Anand, upon examining Victoria, concluded that her injuries were likely the result of deliberate physical abuse. Victoria was admitted to the hospital's pediatric ward under the care of Dr. Yundo Aji Obe, who suspected that Victoria may have been coached into claiming her wounds were self-inflicted. Despite the seriousness of Victoria's injuries, Dr. Ruby Schwartz, a consultant pediatrician, dismissed them as scabies without conducting a thorough examination. This misdiagnosis led to social services downgrading the severity of Victoria's case, allowing Marie to regain custody. The protection order was lifted, and Rachel Darrer, the officer responsible, failed to follow up with Marie and Victoria as required. Tragically, on July 24th, 1999, Marie took Victoria to the Accident and Emergency Department once again, perpetuating the cycle of abuse and negligence. This segment highlights the systemic failures within both the healthcare and social services systems, underscoring the dire consequences for vulnerable children like Victoria. Let's continue to explore the events surrounding Victoria's case and the subsequent repercussions on her well-being. Emergency workers faced an immense challenge in locating Marie and Victoria amidst London's vast urban landscape. Concurrently, Marie, aware of the impending investigation, sought temporary care for Victoria. She approached Priscilla Cameron, asking her to look after Victoria while she was at work. Priscilla, cognizant of Marie's relationship with Carl Manning, questioned why he couldn't care for Victoria. Marie evaded the question, instead proposing that Priscilla take care of Victoria permanently. Priscilla, though willing to help temporarily, emphasized the need for Marie to involve the authorities if she couldn't care for her child. Later that day, when Marie dropped off Victoria at Priscilla's home, both Priscilla and her daughter, Avel Cameron, were alarmed by Victoria's injuries. Dr. Ree Bannon, upon examining Victoria, concluded that her injuries were likely the result of deliberate physical abuse. Victoria was admitted to the hospital's pediatric ward under the care of Dr. Yundo Aji Obe, who suspected that Victoria may have been coached into claiming her wounds were self-inflicted. Despite the seriousness of Victoria's injuries, Dr. Ruby Schwartz, a consultant pediatrician, dismissed them as scabies without conducting a thorough examination. This misdiagnosis led to social services downgrading the severity of Victoria's case, allowing Marie to regain custody. The protection order was lifted, and Rachel Darrer, the officer responsible, failed to follow up with Marie and Victoria as required. Tragically, on July 24th, 1999, Marie took Victoria to the Accident and Emergency Department once again, perpetuating the cycle of abuse and negligence. This segment highlights the systemic failures within both the healthcare and social services systems, underscoring the dire consequences for vulnerable children like Victoria. Let's continue to explore the events surrounding Victoria's case and the subsequent repercussions on her well-being. Acknowledge any shortcomings in the handling of Victoria's case, asserting that Lisa had received adequate support and supervision. However, during the inquiry, it became evident that the workload and organizational deficiencies within the child protection system had indeed contributed to the failures in Victoria's case. The inquiry uncovered systemic issues within child protective services, including chronic underfunding, understaffing, and poor management. It revealed that Victoria's case was not an isolated incident, but rather emblematic of broader failures within the system. Over 100 vulnerable children in the local area had yet to receive attention from social workers due to resource constraints. Marie Teresa Kua and Carl Manning's testimonies during the inquiry shed light on their distorted perceptions and rationalizations for their abhorrent actions. Manning's belief that Victoria was possessed by demonic forces, and Kua's refusal to accept responsibility for her role in Victoria's death, underscored the depths of their depravity. The inquiry's findings prompted calls for sweeping reforms in child protection policies and practices. Recommendations were made to address the systemic deficiencies identified during the investigation, with a focus on improving funding, staffing, and oversight within child protective services. Victoria Clemby's tragic death served as a catalyst for change, sparking national outrage and a renewed commitment to safeguarding vulnerable children. While her life was cut short in a horrific manner, her legacy lives on in the reforms and improvements made to child protection systems in the United Kingdom. As the inquiry concluded, the nation was left grappling with the sobering reality of Victoria's preventable death and the urgent need for systemic change to ensure that such tragedies never occur again. Of children like Victoria will continue to happen, and it will continue to be undetected until it's too late. The inquiry into Victoria Clymbier's tragic death laid bare the systemic failures and individual professional shortcomings that contributed to her horrific ordeal. Lisa Arthur Worry, the junior social worker assigned to Victoria's case, faced scrutiny for her limited experience and heavy workload, while some criticized her for not preventing Victoria's death. Others acknowledged the broader organizational deficiencies that hindered her ability to effectively intervene. Carol Baptist, Lisa's supervisor, came under fire for her lack of oversight and apparent preoccupation with personal matters during critical meetings. Her failure to fully engage with Victoria's case and her subsequent vague responses during the inquiry raised serious questions about her competence and priorities. The inquiry's findings revealed a disturbing pattern of neglect and incompetence across multiple agencies involved in Victoria's care. It highlighted the urgent need for comprehensive reforms to address the systemic deficiencies within the child protection system. The recommendations put forth in the inquiry's report aimed to overhaul Britain's child protection system and prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. However, as Paul Burstow aptly pointed out, true progress requires a candid acknowledgement of the harsh realities of child abuse and neglect, particularly within familial and community settings. Victoria Clymbier's death served as a wake-up call for British society, prompting soul-searching and calls for action to ensure that vulnerable children are adequately protected and supported. Her legacy continues to drive efforts to strengthen child welfare policies and practices, with the ultimate goal of preventing such senseless tragedies from ever happening again. The tragic story of Victoria Clymbier serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of systemic failures and individual shortcomings in child protection systems. Victoria's harrowing ordeal, marked by abuse, neglect, and ultimately her untimely death, exposed deep-seated issues within the agencies tasked with safeguarding vulnerable children. As the inquiry into Victoria's death unfolded, it became painfully clear that her suffering could have been prevented on numerous occasions. From the failures of social workers, overwhelmed by heavy workloads, to the lack of effective supervision and oversight from their superiors, Victoria fell through the cracks of a flawed system. The inquiry's findings, laid out in a comprehensive report, underscored the urgent need for sweeping reforms in Britain's child protection system. Recommendations aimed at addressing the root causes of systemic deficiencies and improving collaboration between agencies were put forth, signaling a commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. Victoria's legacy lives on as a catalyst for change, driving efforts to strengthen child welfare policies, practices, and protocols. Her memory serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and advocacy in protecting the most vulnerable members of society. As we reflect on Victoria's story, let us recommit ourselves to the fundamental principle that every child deserves to grow up in a safe and nurturing environment. Let us honor Victoria's memory by striving to build a world where such senseless tragedies are never allowed to happen again. In the wake of Victoria's death, we must heed the lessons learned and work tirelessly to ensure that no child suffers the same fate. Only through collective action and unwavering dedication can we truly honor Victoria's memory and create a future where all children can thrive and flourish. My favorite hobby is fishing. Sometimes, when I'm targeting a certain kind of fish, and that fish happens to be more active at night, I have no problem staying out all night to catch them. Luckily, in my town, there aren't many places where you're prohibited to fish. In fact, there are popular fishing spots all around. So when I'm fishing alone, I don't get particularly worried or frightened, even at night. Every now and then, another angler will turn up to keep me company. I had been fishing in the same spots for years now, and I wanted a bit of a change. I wanted to find a new place. Give me a bit of a thrill, discovering a new spot with the chances of catching something brand new. Walking around, relying on my headlamp alone for light in the dark, it was peaceful. Until one night, I spent a couple of hours searching for a new place to fish online. I had worked that day until around 5 p.m., and I had all my tackle gear in my car already, so I was ready to just go straight after work ended. The night started to draw in as I headed for a new spot I'd discovered. The spot I'd found was a small embankment located right behind an abandoned factory, because this factory had been abandoned for a number of years now. The building was quite dilapidated, and some parts of it were decaying and had collapsed already. Weeds grew high all around it. It was difficult to make my way through the grounds. It was hard to see where I was going. There were no streetlights on in this area, obviously, so I had to rely on the use of my headlamp as I groped through the weeds toward the embankment. I pushed through all the brush until suddenly it ended with a sharp drop-off into the water below. I nearly even fell in myself. I had reached my destination. I could see the embankment a little bit ways. I found a gap in a fence nearby with a "Do Not Enter" sign that was covered in rust. The width of the gap must have been about a meter or so. I crept through, and I could finally see the whole embankment in all its glory. It was then, for the first time though, that I saw a silhouette of something. A person. He looked like he had beige work clothes on and looked middle-aged, approaching elderly. He was sat on a blue cooler box with a rod in hand. It was a narrow spot, so I took the initiative. It's just manners, really. no matter where you are or why you're fishing. I decided to approach him and strike up some good small talk to let him know I was there. "Good evening, sir. How's it going?" I said. He didn't react at all, didn't move, didn't twitch a muscle. I was only about 50 meters away from him and would have expected him to have heard me. I thought it was a bit strange he didn't respond at all. It wasn't like I'd mumbled or something. His silhouette was dark. I couldn't clearly see him. I felt a bit anxious for a moment, but I tried not to let it bother me too much. My purpose of going there was to fish, not make friends, so I didn't really care. I wasn't going to let that ruin my night. I started to fish, and I was concentrating. About an hour had passed by before I even realized. I was focused on my rod, watching the sea level, watching my lure. It was as if there was nothing else there but me and my hobby. It was in March, and it was early spring that year. It was really warm, even at night. I started to sweat all over. I couldn't stand the heat anymore. I went to take my life jacket off so I could take my shirt off. That was when I noticed something strange. The man had disappeared. Not just him, but his cooler box, his rod. There was just empty darkness left where he had been. He had disappeared. Did he fall into the water or something? I rushed to the edge and peered down with my headlamp's light, illuminating the dark water. There was no trace of the man. It wasn't even 10 o'clock, but a thick fog had formed. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in, and I sensed that something was kind of weird here. Panic started to creep up my mind. I began to sweat, and shivers ran down my spine. Strange gurgling noises echoed from an area of water nearby. I couldn't dare to be there anymore. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my way through the weeds until I arrived back at my car. If I continued fishing like nothing had happened, the thick fog would have enveloped me. I might have easily lost my footing and fell into the water myself. In fact, I wondered if that's what happened to that man. When the thought occurred to me, I shuddered in my car. Since the incident, I quit going to strange places with no entry zones, especially at night. However good it sounds, or whatever fish there might be, it might be a dangerous area if the conditions are right. In another part of my life, I was working in a large assisted living facility for a few years. I absolutely loved my job. I worked with the elderly mostly, but I had become a highly requested assistant and got moved all around. The dementia ward, the short-term rehab ward, the stroke ward, all over the place. Being a people person, I really didn't mind. I liked going the extra mile in my job and getting to know my patients and their families on a more personal level. I felt like it made me a better CNA. It wasn't uncommon for me to be assigned to the more difficult patients because I could typically handle them without much problem. It was a regular day. My charge nurse had mentioned that we would be getting a few new admits, and I didn't think much of it. Everything went routinely, and we got them all settled into their rooms and stuff. One patient in particular was already being a handful and tried to escape a few times. We needed to move him to the secured unit. I could hear him yelling and cussing out everyone, telling them they were all idiots and that it was unnecessary to be doing all of this. A few of the nurses suggested I go and try to calm him down, so of course, I said yes. I put on my most charming smile and walked on over, asking him what exactly was the problem. He immediately seemed to take a liking to me and calm down. He told me nobody there knew how to do their job, and he wanted some damn food already. I told him dinner would be served soon, and I'd make sure to bring his tray to him. He cooperated with everyone as long as I was around, took his meds, took a shower, settled into bed, problem. Once my shift was over, though, he immediately started acting up again, and he ended up needing one-on-one supervision. Different staff members would take turns monitoring him, and eventually I had to as well. It was an easy day's work for me. Get him an ice cream here and there, watch some TV. I didn't really mind at all. He told me a bit about his life, and asked about mine as well. Mostly if I liked what I do, and how come I'd never worked in the security unit. I told him I usually had my own group of patients in the front I had to look after, but I'd make an effort to drop in and see him when I could. At first, the rest of the staff thought it was great. They would call for me if he started acting. Started to take a turn for the worse, as he began to get overly attached. He started saying he wouldn't do anything unless I was there at all times, which of course, I couldn't be since I was needed elsewhere. While I floated to different wards often, the secured unit was one of the ones I spent the least amount of time in. He started to get real mad, saying I needed to make more of an effort to see him, and that I wasn't trying hard enough. I tried to explain to him that technically he was not even my patient, and I couldn't spend my entire work shift just hanging out with him. That's when things started getting really bad. He started lashing out more, yelling and screaming at everyone. He was becoming violent, not only with the staff, but with other patients as well. It was a real liability. I had to drop something off in the security unit one day, and one of the other CNAs told me he had been asking for me. I popped my head in, and he started saying things like, "There's my girl." I felt uneasy, but remained calm on the outside. He was in a good mood, and I didn't want to be the one to set him off for everyone else. He gave me this big hug and kissed me immediately, making me feel queasy. I kind of laughed it off and got myself out of there as quickly as possible. After that, I avoided the secured unit at all costs. He started telling the other nurses he wanted only me to take care of him. And when they said it wasn't possible, because that wasn't my ward, he started going to my bosses and the heads of the facility, trying to convince them to make me his caretaker. Luckily, my boss had my back and told him there was no way I could be assigned back there due to my high demand in other areas. He didn't like hearing that. He started threatening everyone, saying they would be real sorry, and this wasn't the end of that, and so on. My boss called me into the office as soon as I walked into work the next day and explained that I wasn't allowed anywhere near that wing and to avoid all contact with this guy. Well, I surely had no problem with that. I went about my day. He would start banging on all the doors, demanding to be let out and saying he needed to see me. My anxiety was through the roof. I even called out a few times because I didn't want to be anywhere near this guy. The facility was working fast to get him out of there because they had reason to believe I could possibly be in danger due to his escalating violent behavior. On top of all of that, it didn't help that some of the other staff members were whispering behind my back, saying I'd let this all happen, and I was always flirting with him. A bunch of other ugly things as well. Eventually, they did get him discharged, and I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Other than people still talking about me behind my back, of course, I felt like I could get back to doing my job properly. I didn't let the experience change the way I treated the rest of my patients, with open arms and an open heart. Started to get back to normal, or so I thought. One of my days off, I got a call from my coworker. She told me he had called the facility asking specifically for me. She told him I wasn't in for work that day, and he tried to get my schedule. I had dealt with someone stalking me before, so I immediately started to shut down. She told me she had already informed our boss, and I should go to the heads of the facility when I came back to work the next day. That's what I did. I expressed my feelings and told them it made me nervous that he'd called for me. She told me it wasn't just the one time either. They were receiving phone calls non-stop from him, asking when I would be in, and that if they didn't tell him my schedule, he was going to go over there himself and find out one way or another. We had to take a plan of action in case he did show up. They even suggested changing me to a different shift time because he knew I worked mid-afternoon, noon, and evenings. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere by myself and had to be picked up and dropped off at work. While I waited for my ride, I had to wait inside the building and have someone escort me in and out. The calls continued, and finally, they had to threaten legal action. They had a huge meeting with the entire staff of the facility. I felt humiliated, knowing all the whispers and snide comments would come flooding back. But luckily, I got more support than hate. The calls started to slow down, and my true friends at work stood up for me when I wasn't there to defend myself. I started to get back into my routine once again and started feeling like my usual old, perky self. One of my bosses called me into the office one day with a big smile on her face. "I don't think he'll be bothering you anymore. He's in jail for violating parole." I was over the moon. My nightmare was coming to an end. A month or so later. This was a while ago, so I can't exactly remember how long. I was at work getting people ready for bed when suddenly everyone started talking and whispering like crazy. My phone was ringing off the hook, so I finally took a call from one of my charge nurses. She told me the guy had been killed in jail and to check out the article she just sent me. I learned he had an incredibly violent history, including child neglect, other unspeakable things, domestic abuse, robbery, many violent offenses. My boss asked how I was feeling. I told him I couldn't really say. I was a bit sad, but I wasn't surprised that his temper and his mouth had gotten him into some trouble. I've left that facility since then and moved on to bigger things. I sleep soundly at night, knowing someone like that can never bother anyone again. Occasionally, I would join my SO for a smoke on the porch, or if we barbecued with Dave or Sandy, we would invite her over. To say she was awkward would be putting it lightly. We suspected that maybe she was on the spectrum. Perhaps we would be eating. And then she would just randomly start describing how her mother died a slow, agonizing death. Or she would randomly begin explaining her latest yeast infection in great detail. I kid you not. Sometimes I would work out on our porch. I had a small bench with a bar and some weights. One day, I was lifting when I almost dropped the bar on my neck. In surprise, leaning over me was Carol. "You know I could have snapped your neck like a twig if I wanted to," she mumbled. I sat up confused. "Pardon?" I asked. "I said you really could have hurt yourself," she said. I doubted what I'd heard, chalking it up to not hearing her correctly the first time, but she had this weird smirk on her face. After that, I tried my best to ignore her. However, I had not told my SO my suspicions that maybe old Carol here was a bit absolutely insane. I came home from class one evening, and my SO and Carol were on the porch. I went inside because I was coming down with something and just wanted to go to bed. My SO came in and told me she was going to her job. She worked nights as a dispatcher for the campus police. I was real out of it. She kissed me goodnight and said she'd lock up the house and see me in the morning. Around 1 a.m., I woke up covered in sweat. I went to get a glass of water and started drinking it. That was when I looked over and saw my SO on the couch. Or at least, who I assumed to be my SO. I was so out of it, I just crawled back into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up. My SO walked in the door, telling me that work last night had been real crazy. Wait, what? You weren't at work? You were here, I said. She looked at me funny, and I got a sick feeling in my gut. Fever or no fever, I knew someone had been sitting on that couch. My SO wrote it off as a fever dream. The house had been locked up when she left. I forgot about it. Life went on, and graduation was approaching. Things with my side of the family, well, specifically my egg donor, went badly. Long story short, my SO was offered a job back in our home state of New York. So, we gave notice to our landlord. We let Sandy and Dave know. And one night, we told Carol as well. She gave us this blank stare, then headed back to our house without saying a word. We just brushed it off as her being weird as usual. That night, we were asleep when I heard a creaking coming from the living area. I sat up. My SO heard it too. She grabbed my arm, and I grabbed the metal bat under our bed. "Who's there?" I asked. The door thudded. Thank God it was locked. My SO dialed 911. Meanwhile, I was watching as someone attempted to recreate the door scene from The Shining. Except, instead of a big axe, whoever was doing it was using a small hatchet. They were making progress on the door, though, as it was pretty much hollow. The 6 minutes it took for police to get there felt like a lifetime. I could see each time the hatchet's tip breached through the door. Suddenly, we heard the cops. "Put your weapon down," I yelled, not knowing who it was until we were led out of our place. As we were leaving, there on the couch and in cuffs was Carol. We learned after that she had been in and out of jail. Supposedly, she'd gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs after long-term meth use. She was arrested and charged with breaking and entering and destruction of property. They tried to get her on attempted assault, but she made a plea deal that included some kind of psychiatric treatment. I never could prove she was in my place the day I was sick, but I was sure it was her. As we were moving, I was messing around with our storage space. Really, a crawl space underneath the home we had never used. Curious, I crawled around underneath there and saw that if you kicked hard enough, you could get the screen that led to the outside off easily. Who knows how many times she might have been in our place or underneath our house listening to us. We still keep in touch with Sandy and Dave. The unit Carol rented was sold, though, and they haven't seen her since she was carted off to jail. Thankfully, we're now thousands of miles away, and we'll never have to see her again. This happened yesterday, while both of my parents were at work. For context, my dad's a mailman, and my mom is an RV saleswoman that's always on her feet. Neither can pick up their phone very quickly. I do have an older brother, but he's at college 2 hours away, so he's not really an actor in this story. I was sitting in the living room with my dog, a fairly big German shepherd, but can't really do much harm. That was when I heard what sounded like people talking out in the hallway. This wasn't that unusual. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment, and there's a really noisy family right next door that likes to bring over their friends a lot. This was also a Saturday, so it's not like I was expecting pure quiet or anything. I obviously just ignored the talking. It was not that loud, and I had my headphones on. All of a sudden, though, my dog perked up and walked toward the door with an alert posture. The hair on his back was sticking right up, which usually never happened. I got concerned and took my headphones out. That's when I heard the voices from before. I could now clearly recognize two adult men yelling very loudly in the apartment hallway. I got a bit freaked out, so I pushed my dog away from the door. I double-checked to make sure it was locked and crept towards it to peek out and make sure they weren't near my place. When I looked out the peephole, I couldn't see either of them, and because the only blind spot in my peephole is directly to the right, I knew these must be my neighbors. As I was leaning against it, the whole front door started shaking. The men were banging. A dangerous move. I dialed 911, my heart pounding in my chest as I relayed the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way. But every second felt like an eternity as I huddled in my brother's room with my dog, praying for the police to arrive. The banging continued, growing louder and more frantic. I could hear the men shouting threats and demands, their voices muffled through the door. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, realizing just how vulnerable I was in that moment. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that consumed me. What if the men managed to break down the door before help arrived? What if they had weapons? What if they were intent on harming me? Despite my fear, I knew I had to stay calm and focused. I kept my phone clutched tightly in my hand, ready to call for help at a moment's notice. My dog whimpered beside me, sensing my unease, but I held onto him tightly, finding solace in his presence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Relief flooded through me as the noise grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police. Moments later, I heard voices outside my door, commands being shouted, and then the sound of the door being forced open. The next few minutes were a blur as the police stormed into the apartment, apprehending the intruders and securing the scene. I stayed huddled in my brother's room, my heart still racing, until an officer came to check on me and ensure that I was unharmed. As the adrenaline began to fade, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the swift response of law enforcement. Without their intervention, the situation could have escalated into something far more dangerous. I thanked the officer profusely before they left, feeling immense relief knowing that I was safe once again. In the aftermath of the incident, I couldn't help but reflect on the fragility of safety and the importance of being vigilant in protecting oneself. It was a harrowing experience that I would never forget, but it also served as a stark reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Sat next to my locked bedroom door, quietly calling 911 with my dog by my side. Throughout the ordeal, I made sure to keep as quiet as possible. I'm pretty sure they didn't know anyone was home, even though they said, "We know you're in there," during their yelling. I was on the phone with 911 for a few minutes before I heard light knocking at my door. I was in such shock that I didn't even realize the banging had stopped. The operator said it was the cops, so I ended the call and answered the door. The officers told me the guys had taken off as they arrived. They asked me a few questions about male family members who could have any correlation with the incident, but it was discovered that nobody did. It was a hot summer's day, and my mom took my siblings and me to play in a stream at a park where people often went for walks or fishing. It was very isolated though, and there were hardly ever many people around. My siblings and I were enjoying splashing in the water, and we even caught a few fish. Everything was going great, and we came here quite often. That was until off in the distance, we heard a twig break, and and noticed a group of men coming towards us. We thought they must have been going for a walk, or maybe wanted to go fishing as well. So we didn't really pay that much attention to them. We continued what we were doing, but eventually they started coming closer to us. They also began to do the strange circling and pattern around us, and just kept staring at us the whole time. My mom started to become quite worried, and us kids were confused as well. Why were they just staring? Now they seemed to be slowly coming closer as well. They all gave each other this unsettling look, and then started to enclose and surround us. My mom grabbed us kids right away and told us to run. The four of us ran as fast as we could and managed to slip in between their encirclement. We got back to our car. I turned around to see what those men were doing, and they were all walking away in the same direction, staring at us in an eerie way. Once we got to the car, my mom sped away, and that's when I realized what was going on. Those guys probably wanted to do something bad to us, and since my dad wasn't there with us, it made us quite the easy targets. My mom, siblings, and I never went back there again. If we hadn't run away before they got any closer, I don't know what might have happened to us. I, now a 20-year-old woman, was 13 at the time this story takes place. It was the summer between 7th and 8th grade for me, which would make the year 2016. I had just moved to a new city about an hour away from where I grew up. To help me make friends before the school year started, my mom signed me up for a day camp in the new town over the summer. At this camp, I actually did develop a small friend group, but the only one that matters in this story would be Jay, a 14-year-old. I'm going to be honest, Jay was always more flirty with me than I was comfortable with, and I'd expressed that several times. I always tried to minimize confrontation when I did so. Sounded like the perfect romantic getaway. We booked our flights and accommodations, and soon enough, we were jetting off to the beautiful islands of Hawaii. Our honeymoon started off wonderfully. We explored the breathtaking beaches, indulged in delicious Hawaiian cuisine, and basked in the warmth of the sun. However, our paradise soon turned into a nightmare. One evening, we decided to take a sunset stroll along the beach, hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. Everything seemed serene and peaceful until we noticed a group of men loitering nearby. At first, we didn't pay much attention to them, assuming they were just fellow tourists enjoying the sunset like us. As we continued our walk, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The men started following us, their footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet evening air. Julie and I exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. We quickened our pace, hoping to put some distance between us and the strangers, but they kept getting closer. Suddenly, they began shouting obscenities at us, their voices filled with aggression and hostility. We tried to ignore them and kept walking, but they persisted, hurling insults and threats in our direction. Panic began to rise within me as I realized we were being targeted by a group of hostile individuals in an unfamiliar place. With no one else around to help us, Julie and I knew we had to act fast. We broke into a run, hoping to reach safety before the situation escalated further. The men gave chase, their shouts growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. Thankfully, we spotted a nearby resort and made a beeline for it, praying that we could find refuge within its walls. We burst through the doors, breathless and terrified, and immediately sought help from the staff. They sprang into action, calling the authorities and ensuring our safety until help arrived. The men were eventually apprehended by the police, but the trauma of that evening stayed with us long after our honeymoon ended. It was a stark reminder that danger can lurk even in the most idyllic of settings, and that we must always remain vigilant and prepared to protect ourselves. Despite the ordeal, Julie and I emerged stronger and more united than ever. We refused to let fear dictate our lives, and instead, we chose to focus on the love and joy that had brought us together in the first place. Our honeymoon may have been marred by adversity, but it only served to deepen our bond and reaffirm our commitment to each other. As we look back on that harrowing experience, we're grateful for the kindness and support we received from the resort staff and local authorities. Their swift action undoubtedly saved us from a far worse fate, and for that, we'll be forever thankful. And though the memory of that evening may still send shivers down our spines, it serves as a powerful reminder of our resilience and the strength of our love. To end, we descended deeper and deeper until the sunlight became a mere glimmer far above us. The underwater world unfolded before us in all its mesmerizing beauty. Colorful fish darted around coral reefs, swaying gently with the currents. Sea turtles gracefully glided by, and delicate sea creatures adorned the ocean floor. Despite the encounter with the unpleasant man on the boat, Julie and I were soon lost in the enchantment of the underwater realm. We explored hidden caves and crevices, marveling at the diversity of marine life surrounding us. Every twist and turn revealed a new wonder, and we were grateful to experience it together, hand in hand, beneath the waves. As we swam side by side, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for Julie's presence in my life. She had been my rock, my companion, and my source of strength since the day we met. And here, in the depths of the ocean, surrounded by the majesty of nature, our bond felt stronger than ever. Eventually, our air supply began to run low, and we reluctantly began our ascent back to the surface. The journey upward was bittersweet, as we reluctantly left behind the underwater paradise that had captivated us. But as we broke through the surface and emerged into the warm sunlight once more, I knew that our honeymoon, filled with moments of both challenge and beauty, would be a memory we would cherish for a lifetime. Widened in shock and concern, we were both trembling with adrenaline and fear as I recounted the terrifying experience. The realization that someone had deliberately attacked me underwater in such a vulnerable and isolated environment sent chills down our spines. The diving instructor, upon hearing what had happened, immediately radioed for assistance and notified the authorities. The rest of the group, including the older man, were equally shocked and horrified by the news. It was a stark reminder of how quickly a peaceful excursion could turn into a life-threatening situation. As we returned to shore, our minds raced with questions and uncertainties. Who was the attacker? What was their motive? And perhaps most unsettling of all, could they still be lurking nearby, waiting to strike again? Despite the fear and trauma of the experience, Julie and I found solace in each other's arms. We knew that we would always have each other's backs, both above and below the surface. And as we left the beach behind and returned to the safety of our resort, we vowed to never let fear dictate our love for adventure and exploration. And cautious in the future, the incident shook us to the core and made us acutely aware of the potential dangers that can lurk beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively. Despite the unsettling conclusion to our honeymoon adventure, Julie and I found strength in each other and in our unwavering commitment to stand up against injustice and violence. We refused to let fear dictate our lives, but we also understood the importance of being vigilant and cautious in unfamiliar situations. As we returned home and settled back into our daily routines, the memory of that harrowing experience remained with us, serving as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment with loved ones. Moving forward, we made a pact to always prioritize our safety and well-being. Whether we're exploring the depths of the ocean or simply navigating the challenges of everyday life. And while the scars from that traumatic event may linger, they also serve as a testament to our resilience and determination to overcome adversity together. In closing, these stories shed light on the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity, from navigating workplace challenges to surviving harrowing encounters. Each narrative is a testament to the strength and courage found within individuals when faced with daunting circumstances. Through solidarity, support, and a steadfast commitment to one another, the protagonists in these stories overcame obstacles, confronted danger, and emerged stronger on the other side. They remind us of the importance of standing up for what is right, cherishing the moments we have with loved ones, and never losing hope, even in the darkest of times. As we reflect on these tales, let us carry forward the lessons learned, embracing empathy, understanding, and a determination to create a safer and more compassionate world for all. In the end, it is our shared humanity that binds us together, offering solace, strength, and the promise of brighter tomorrows. This is a short story, but it really freaked my husband and me out big time. My husband and I love weekend camping in Utah, specifically in the area of Simpson Springs. We've camped there a few times, and the camping spot we've had our eye on the last couple of trips was actually available. So we jumped at the chance of getting it. It's surrounded by a couple of huge boulder rocks, so it's a little more private than the other campsites. On this particular weekend, we went mountain biking on the Porcupine Rim Trail, doing what they call the whole enchilada. So we made an entire day out of it. After a long day of biking, we were really looking forward to a nice campfire and a cozy night in our tent trailer. After we ate dinner and enjoyed the fire, the wind started to pick up. So we decided to go to bed early, since we were getting up early anyway, to try out the Amasa back trail. We put out the fire and made sure that everything was locked up. As we were lying in bed half asleep, my husband says, "Hey, do you hear that?" I sat up and I heard someone walking around our tent trailer. We peeked out of the windows, but we couldn't see anything. Yet we could still hear something or someone walking around out there. A few minutes passed by, and we were both wondering what the hell we should do. As we were standing by the door, suddenly someone tried to open it. Now there are two doors, a screen door and the main door, and luckily they were both locked. They tried to open the door again, so we both pulled out our guns, and my husband then yelled, "Hey, who the hell is out there?" We waited for a long minute, and again, We heard someone walking around outside of the trailer. Another few minutes went by, and we didn't hear anything. So we decided to go outside and see if we could see anyone or anything, for that matter. But the size of the footprints sounded more human than animal. As we were walking around, we realized there were no fresh footprints, as the wind from earlier had brushed the soft dirt over everything. And all we saw were our own footprints that we had just made. We decided to go back to bed with our guns ready just in case, but we didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The next day, we did the Amethyst trail again, and once more, we camped in the same spot. We went to bed early, waiting to see if anything would happen again. Well, wouldn't you know it? We heard what sounded like someone walking around our campsite again. But whatever it was, didn't try to open the door again. Thank God. When we got up the next morning, we inspected around, and the only footprints we saw were our own, and no animal prints either. We decided to pack up camp that morning and went to another spot close by. We drove around the arches that day, and when we got back to camp, someone had already taken the spot we were in just the last 2 nights. We decided to warn them, no matter how crazy it sounded. But we really believed it was a haunted campsite, because again, we didn't see any fresh footprints in the dirt, but ours. Whatever the case, it was absolutely a creepy experience for us. When I was 17, I went camping with a big group of my friends, 6 of us, including me, all huddled together with enough alcohol to fill a brewery. We were camping out in a forest in our town, which was very rural, with less than 200 people. We didn't even have a supermarket. We only had a gas station you could walk to in about 10 minutes. The nearest supermarket was a 30-minute drive away, so you needed a car to live in this town. Everyone knew everyone, and we were really bored teenagers looking for fun. I was having the time of my life. It was 3 a.m. in pitch black, and we were telling spooky stories, drunk out of our asses. When I ended up puking, I knew it was time for me to go to bed. Our parents all knew what we were up to, but they trusted us because we were usually a responsible group. Our town was so tiny that they felt it would be fine. The forest wasn't even that far away from our houses, which ended up being just our luck. I was asleep, but not for long. I woke up to thumping outside my tent. I was in a tent with 2 of my friends, wedged in between them both, because they were so worried about me rolling onto my back during the night. I was groggy, and the tent was spinning, even though it was so dark. I remember grabbing my phone and checking the time, but I couldn't see it because my eyes were so blurry. I was too messed up to want to move, but the thumping was really annoying me. I ended up shouting to shut up, assuming it was a friend from the other tent. It was silent, and then suddenly chaos ensued. Something jumped onto our tent, literally like a starfish throwing itself on top of us. I started screaming, and then my friends woke up in fear and drunk confusion as well. They weren't as drunk as I was, but I was so scared that I almost felt sober again. We were all screaming and thrashing around. Somehow, we got out of the tent because the weight lifted, and my other friends dashed out of theirs as well, screaming, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" One of my friends explained that something jumped on our tent, and we were all babbling and waving our phone flashlights around. My friend had spotted a flashlight on the ground that wasn't ours, and we all freaked out even more. One of my more sober friends eventually shouted that we all had to cool it and get out of there and go back to his place. We agreed, and we didn't even take half of our stuff. We just grabbed whatever and fled back to his house. It was like 15 minutes of just running in the dark, totally terrified. Once we got there, he had a key, and we all just crashed inside. We couldn't stop wondering what had happened, and my friend's parents even woke up as we were being so loud. My friend's dad said in the morning that we'd all go back and take a look, and that we probably just imagined it, because we were obviously in a state. When I woke up later, I felt rough as hell, but I also knew that I hadn't imagined it. Neither did my two other friends. Our other friends all believed us, but my friend's dad didn't. That is, until we got there. When we went back, our tents were all cut up. We were so creeped out by this, and the stuff we left was also gone. Our sleeping bags and some food and alcohol were just missing. One of my friends also left a backpack, and that was gone too. She didn't have anything important inside, thankfully. But still, my friend's dad knew the local police officers very well due to how small the town was. They agreed that it was weird, and they said we should avoid that area indefinitely. They did scope the scene, but they never found anything. No handprints or any good evidence. I don't know what's scarier. The idea of something jumping on our tent and ripping it up, then stealing our stuff, or someone doing it. Bears aren't an issue. Neither are coyotes or anything like that. Nothing is in this forest. My country doesn't have those things. The town is so small that it seems very unlikely that a stranger was there. Yet it's really disturbing to think that it was someone from our local community. This memory still gives me chills to this day. It's been a few years since this happened, and I still talk to all of my friends who are all there. We'll never know what really happened that night, but I'm just glad we were all right. Maybe some things really are better not to know. I'm a 25-year-old male, and I was probably around 21 at the time that this happened. Several years ago, I was taking an afternoon walk down the nature trail just outside the subdivision where I lived. I want to note that this trail was right next to a moderately busy 2-lane road with some houses on the opposite side of the road, so the area wasn't desolate. However, there was a line of trees and foliage that stood between the trail and the road, obscuring the view of one side from the other, so passing cars wouldn't have a clear view of what transpired on the trail. At some point, I spotted a woman, late 20s if I had to guess, standing alone in the middle of the trail. She stood there and watched me as I made my way down the trail towards her. Once I got close, she asked if she could borrow my cell phone to call someone. Now, I had already read enough scary stories on subreddits like Let's Not Meet to know tactics like this. I had heard the stories about a woman who had asked for aid, get people in a vulnerable position, and then a man would swoop in and take the mark by surprise. I did hesitate, but I still gave in to the social pressure and desire to help another person in need. I gave her my phone despite my better judgment. However, I was on edge. I tensed up and began looking around the place to see if anyone could pop out from somewhere, ready to react if someone would show up. I also made a point to remain standing in arm's reach of the woman. Then I heard rustling from the brush. I instantaneously turned towards the sound and watched as a man emerged from the foliage. He looked around the same age as the woman and was notably quite short, probably around 5'5", if I had to guess. I was probably glaring at him with very obvious suspicion as he made his way over to the woman, standing at her side without saying a word. The woman then handed me my phone back, saying they didn't pick up, not even reacting to the man's presence. I just took my phone and then left. What I assume happened is that they were planning to mug me, but ended up bailing for whatever reason. Maybe it's because I was visibly on edge, and they figured it wasn't worth trying to get the drop on me. Maybe the guy figured there was too much of a size difference between us. Or maybe he'd already put his plan into action, made a little too much noise, and then bailed while keeping a completely cool face as he made his escape. His way over to his presumed significant other. For my part, I was ready to grab the woman and then use her as a human shield. Maybe even push her onto the guy. I'm really glad it didn't come to that, though. Especially given the outside possibility that there is some non-mugging explanation for this. But I guess I'll never really know for sure. Hello, my name is Liberty. I won't give you my last name for privacy reasons. I'm a 19-year-old female with long blonde hair and big blue eyes. It was springtime weather, so I was wearing my light blue top, Daisy Duke short shorts, and brown cowboy boots on my feet. I go to a university in Pennsylvania. I decided to visit my parents for a few days, who lived several hours away from my university. The car I drove was a 10-year-old red Ford Mustang. The road I was driving down was the kind of road where you see nothing but miles and miles of road with dense woods on each side of it. Sometimes you see a few deer and foxes along the way. And then, to my disgust, I heard my car shake and rattle. And I just knew something was wrong with it. So I decided to pull my car to the curb. As soon as I pulled it over, my car's engine stopped completely. I tried over and over again to start it up, but it just wouldn't start. I then lifted up the hood of my car, and I knew it must have been my engine that had given out. Unfortunately, there was no cell phone signal where I was, and it was getting hot outside. I didn't want to die of dehydration, but all I could really do at that moment was sit on the hood of my car and just wait for help to arrive. But on a lonely road like this, that help could take a long time. An hour passed by with no vehicles yet. I looked up in the sky and saw a big red-tailed hawk flying lazily above me, almost hoping I would kick off and die so it could feed on my dead body. This was not an appetizing thought. I then heard a car rumbling down the road. When it got closer, I could see it was a 1919 Model T Ford, carrying in good condition, with an elderly man driving it. He looked like a preacher man, wearing glasses and a fedora black hat on his head, with a black minister's top on. I tried to flag him down, but he just quickly drove right past me without even looking in my direction. People are not as trusting of one another these days. He, being elderly, may have thought I was a highway bandit or something, and he was not going to take the chance of getting robbed or killed because of me. So I just watched as the oddly preacher in his 1919 Ford Model T then disappeared into the sunset, right as I looked up the road, hoping that another vehicle would pass by and help me very soon. Another hour passed by, then two. I was starting to sweat. It was getting hot now, and I was getting tired. I almost nodded off when I saw up the road another vehicle coming. It was an old pickup truck. As soon as it stopped, I was in total surprise to see this enormous 340-pound man. He was in his 20s, unshaven, dirty, and unkempt. He wore blue overalls. He smelled like milk. Yet underneath the smell was the smell of horse manure, but the smell of milk on his body was much stronger. The big man giggled and laughed and looked at me. I knew that he must be attracted to me by the way he was looking. "Hey, miss, what are you doing way out here all alone like this?" He smiled, and I could see many crooked and missing teeth. I was just about to answer this man when he suddenly grabbed my arm. Luckily, My arm was slick with sweat, and he couldn't get a good grip on me as I then yanked my arm away and started to run through the woods away from him. This man may have been a simpleton, but who knew what the hell he wanted to do with me, which was probably rape me and then kill me so there would be no witness as to what he had done. I didn't plan on giving him the chance. As I ran like hell through the woods, I then hid behind a big ass rock. But this man was smart enough to know that I must be hiding somewhere close, as he stopped running too, and then stayed in the area, calling me, "Chicky, chicky, chicky, come here," trying to lure me out. I then saw my chance as I saw a big branch nearby, and I then picked it up. I waited for him to get close so I could hit him with it and then make my escape. When the huge man got near the rock where I was hiding, I suddenly jumped out, surprising the hell out of him as I then clocked him right in the jaw with the big branch, to which he then yelled and then fell to the forest ground in pain. I then dropped the branch and took off down the woods. I could hear the man cursing at me in anger. "Ouch, you!" It was really frightening to me. I then looked back quickly, and I saw him getting up as he started to give chase yet again. I was running at about full speed down the woods at this point, when I then stopped in fright for a brief second, as I saw a black bear growling at me not too far away. Yes, an actual bear. I then stopped and stared at him in fear. Then the bear suddenly moved off, frightened by the sounds that the large man was giving off. As then, I took off through the dense forest, trying to find me. Now, I took track and field in high school and college, and it was serving me well. I was still outrunning this man, but he could run remarkably well for his huge size, and I could still hear him not too far behind me. I was running at full speed down the dense woods when I felt a big tree branch hit me hard on the back. I then lost my balance and fell down a steep hill into the water. I was pretty hurt when the man threw the big branch at me, but when I was in the water, I decided to play dead. I must have been a good actress, because the big man, after staring at me for a full 12 minutes, lying seamlessly lifeless in the water, finally headed back through the woods where he came from. I figured that he must have known the woods pretty well, because it really seemed like he had no fear going right back to his vehicle. When the big man finally left, I waited a bit more just to make sure. As I got my battered body out of the water, I then ran up a hill. The main road wasn't too far away as I ran quickly to it. When I got to the road, I was in luck. There was a young man in a big Range Rover who had stopped to help me. I explained the whole situation to him, and when I got into his vehicle, he dropped me off at the police station. I thanked him many times for his help. Inside the police station, I explained everything to them and described what the man looked like to a police artist. Then I made the call to my parents, who picked me up and drove me home. They were thankful I was still alive with all that I had been through. Unfortunately, the police never found that man who was trying to harm me. I really regret this, because he'll probably try again with some other poor, attractive, and vulnerable woman in the future. I just pray that I never meet that man. This harrowing experience highlights the importance of staying vigilant and trusting one's instincts in potentially dangerous situations. It's also a reminder of the kindness of strangers who come to our aid in times of need. However, it's disheartening that despite the efforts of law enforcement, some perpetrators may evade capture, leaving a lingering sense of fear and vulnerability in their wake. Thank you for sharing your stories with us today. If you have your own story that you would like to share, you can send it to southerncannibal.com or email it to hi@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing your story. Have a good night or a good day, everyone, and remember to always stay hungry. This closing remark emphasizes the theme of storytelling and community engagement, while also incorporating a signature sign-off phrase, reinforcing the channel's identity and encouraging audience participation.